Elizabeth stood by the large window of her hotel room, admiring the picturesque view of the Gulf of Portofino. The sun was slowly setting over the horizon, painting the sky in warm shades of pink and orange. She still couldn't believe that she was finally here, in the most romantic part of Italy, on her honeymoon. "You are the most beautiful bride in the world," William whispered, hugging her from behind. Elizabeth turned to him, feeling her heart fill with happiness. "And I can't believe it's not a dream. The wedding was so fabulous. Thanks to Amelia," William added, kissing her temple. "We couldn't have done it without her." "Yes," Elizabeth agreed, remembering how her best friend helped with every little detail. "Amelia is irreplaceable. You know, she even cried more than I did during the ceremony." William laughed lightly. "She's always been emotional. Do you remember how she introduced us at that party?" "Of course," Elizabeth smiled. Remembering that evening 2 years ago, she said, "Elizabeth, I've found the man of your dreams." And you know what? She was right. William hugged his wife tightly. "Shall we go to dinner?" "I made a reservation at the best restaurant in town." "Give me 15 minutes." Elizabeth kissed him and headed for the bathroom. As she prepared for dinner, her eyes fell on the wedding photo she had placed on her dressing table. It showed the three of them, she, William, and Amelia, smiling and happy. Amelia looked stunning in her lavender bridesmaid dress. "How lucky I am," Elizabeth thought, "to have such a wonderful husband and such a devoted friend." During dinner, William kept his eyes on her. "You know, the first time I saw you, I knew you were special." "Really?" Elizabeth sipped her wine. "I thought you were just flirting, like all the other girls at the party." "All of them?" He pretended to be offended. "You were the only one who caught my attention." "And do you know why?" "Why?" "Because you were real. You weren't trying to impress anyone. You were just being yourself. That's rare these days." Elizabeth felt her cheeks flush at the compliment. "Do you remember our first fight, when you were 2 hours late for a date?" "Oh, yes," William laughed. "I was stuck in an important meeting and couldn't leave." "And you?" "I thought you'd dumped me and I'd already cried to Amelia on the phone," Elizabeth finished. "Silly, he's not like that." And she was right. William took her hand and kissed it gently. "I'll never leave you, my love. Never." Elizabeth looked at her husband and felt her heart overflow with love. She didn't know what she had done to deserve such happiness, but she was grateful for every moment. When they returned to the hotel, they stood on the balcony for a long time, looking at the starry sky. William hugged her, and at that moment, it seemed to Elizabeth that life just couldn't get any better. "Write to Amelia," he suddenly said. "She asked me to let her know how we arrived." "Oh, right!" Elizabeth took out her phone and quickly typed a message. "Amelia, darling, we are in heaven. Thank you for everything. You are the best friend in the world." The answer came almost instantly. "Enjoy your love. You deserve the best." Elizabeth smiled and leaned into her husband. She had no idea that this best would be so short, and that her closest friend, whom she trusted so much, would soon break her heart into 1,000 pieces. A warm Italian evening bathed Portofino in soft light. Elizabeth and William chose a table on the restaurant's terrace overlooking the yachts swaying on the waves of the bay. The waiter had just brought their order, seafood pasta and a bottle of local white wine. "To us," William raised his glass, looking at his wife with tenderness. "To our future." Suddenly, his phone vibrated. William glanced at the screen, and his face changed for a moment. "Is something wrong?" Elizabeth asked, noticing his shoulders tense. No, just work stuff," he replied, putting the phone away too quickly. Elizabeth tried to smile. "But you promised not to work on your honeymoon." "I'm sorry, darling. This is the last time, I promise." He picked up his fork again, but a few minutes later the phone vibrated again. "Is it something urgent?" Elizabeth asked, trying to hide her irritation. William got up from the table. "I have to take this. It's quick." He walked away a few meters, turning his back on her. Elizabeth watched him say something quietly into the phone, looking back from time to time. His shoulders were tense, and his free hand was nervously tugging at his tie. "It's strange," she thought. "He doesn't usually hide his work-related conversations." When William came back, His face was a little pale. "I'm sorry, honey. You know how it is with clients." "It's okay," Elizabeth replied, although something about his behavior bothered her. "What kind of client calls this late?" "Oh, it's from New York. The time difference, you know?" But Elizabeth knew it was even earlier in New York. She decided not to dwell on it. Maybe she was just being too picky. The next day, they went on a tour of the coast. It was a beautiful day, but William kept checking his phone. "Why don't you turn it off?" Elizabeth suggested, when he pulled out his phone for the third time in an hour. "You're right," he agreed, but he didn't turn it off. In the evening, when they returned to the hotel, Elizabeth noticed that William, thinking she was in the bathroom, had gone out to the balcony with his phone. "No, she doesn't realize—" She heard fragments of the conversation. "Of course, neither do I. I'll see you soon." Elizabeth's heart sank. "Don't imagine things," she told herself. "He's just talking to a colleague. But then why is it that she has no idea?" At dinner, William was especially attentive and gentle, as if trying to make up for his aloofness during the day. "You know," he said as he poured her wine, "I've been thinking about buying a house, the one you dreamed of, with a big garden." "Really?" Elizabeth's eyes sparkled. "But you said it wasn't the right time." "I'd do anything for you." He took her hand. "You deserve the best." That night, Elizabeth could not sleep for a long time. Something had changed. She could feel it. William lay next to her, immersed in a restless sleep, and from time to time his phone vibrated softly on the nightstand. She looked at the moon outside the window and remembered their wedding. Amelia had said then, "You two are made for each other. I've never seen such a happy groom before." Suddenly, William's phone vibrated again. This time, the screen lit up, and Elizabeth unwittingly saw the name of the sender. Her heart skipped a beat. It was Amelia. Why is she texting him in the middle of the night? She thought. But Elizabeth pushed it away. It must be something urgent. They were friends. But then why didn't he tell her about these messages? The next morning at breakfast, William looked tired. "Did you sleep badly?" Elizabeth asked, trying to make her voice sound casual. "Amelia's not sleeping because of work either." The words came out before she could think. William froze with a cup of coffee in his hand. "What do you mean?" "Nothing," Elizabeth answered quickly. "I just saw her texting you last night." "Oh, that's—" He cleared his throat. She asked about a gift we're bringing her. You know how she is." Elizabeth nodded, but something about his explanation didn't seem right. She remembered how, on the eve of the wedding, Amelia had said, "You are so happy, Elizabeth. Sometimes I envy you." At the time, these words seemed to her like an ordinary friendly confession. But now— "Shall we go for a swim today?" William suggested, obviously trying to change the subject. "The weather is beautiful." "Yes, of course," Elizabeth replied, but anxiety had already settled in her soul. She looked at her husband and tried to convince herself that it was all in her imagination. But the wormhole of doubt had already begun its destructive work, and Elizabeth knew that something in her perfect world had gone wrong. She just didn't know how bad it was yet. The small streets of Portofino beckoned with their coziness. Elizabeth walked along the waterfront, enjoying the coolness of the morning. William stayed at the hotel. "An important video conference with clients," he explained. She had grown accustomed to his constant work-related activities these days. Stopping at a small coffee shop, Elizabeth decided to have a cappuccino. And suddenly, "Elizabeth, I can't believe it. What a meeting. That voice, so familiar, so out of place here." Elizabeth turned around slowly. Amelia stood before her, dressed in a light summer dress, with large sunglasses on her head. "Amelia?" Elizabeth exhaled, feeling her heart beat faster. How did you end up here?" "Oh, it's such a funny story." Amelia hugged her friend happily. "I won a voucher at work. Imagine, a free trip to Italy. Isn't it a miracle?" Elizabeth froze in her friend's arms. Something was wrong. "And of all the cities in Italy, you chose Portofino?" she asked, trying to control her voice. "Well, you know how much I love the sea." Amelia waved her hand carefree. "By the way, where is William?" "At the hotel. He's working," Elizabeth answered, watching her friend's reaction carefully. Oh, he's still a workaholic, Amelia laughed, but her eyes flashed something like relief. Listen, let's have coffee together. Tell me how your honeymoon is going. They sat down at a table. Elizabeth felt strange, as if she were playing a role in a play where everyone but her knew the script. So, how do you like it here? Amelia stirred the coffee, keeping her sunglasses on, even though they were sitting in the shade. It must be very romantic. Yes, Elizabeth answered briefly. How long have you been here? Just yesterday, Amelia replied quickly. Perhaps too soon. Imagine the coincidence. A coincidence, Elizabeth thought, remembering the nightly messages on her husband's phone. How long are you planning to stay? She asked. I haven't decided yet, Amelia shrugged. You know how it is. As long as I like it, I'll be here. At that moment, Amelia's phone vibrated. She looked at the screen and quickly turned the phone face down. Is it someone important? Elizabeth asked innocently. No, just spam. Amelia waved it off, but her cheeks turned slightly pink. Elizabeth remembered how she and Amelia used to talk for hours, sharing their most intimate secrets. When did that change? When did this invisible wall appear between them? Oh, by the way, Amelia suddenly said, maybe we should have dinner together tonight? You, me, and William? I don't know, Elizabeth replied. It is our honeymoon after all. Of course, Amelia quickly agreed. I was just thinking. We are friends, aren't we? We are, Elizabeth replied slowly. Best friends. When she returned to the hotel, William was still busy on the phone on the balcony. How was your walk, my love? He asked, kissing her cheek. Interesting, Elizabeth replied. I met Amelia. William froze for a moment. Only for a moment, but Elizabeth noticed it. Amelia? He asked again, trying to sound surprised. Here? Yes, imagine that. She won a trip at work. How unexpected, he said, turning to the window. Haven, TU. Elizabeth was staring at his back. She asked him to have dinner with her. And what did you say? He asked too quickly. That this was our honeymoon. That quote's right. He turned and hugged her. This is our time. It's our time. But his embrace seemed tense to her. Why hadn't he asked where Amelia was staying? Why hadn't he been more surprised? In the evening, lying in bed, Elizabeth recalled all the small details of that day. How Amelia nervously twirled her heel as she talked about the voucher she had won. How William avoided looking at her directly when she told him about the meeting. How they both reacted to the phone messages. She pulled out her phone and opened the last message from Amelia, sent a week ago. You deserve the best, girlfriend. Enjoy your honeymoon. I deserve the best, Elizabeth repeated in her mind. Why does everything seem so wrong? William was sleeping next to her. His phone vibrated softly on the nightstand again. Elizabeth closed her eyes, trying not to think about who could be texting him at this hour. But deep down, she already knew the answer, and that answer was breaking her heart to pieces. The evening was warm and muggy. Elizabeth stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her dress for the last time. She had hesitated for a long time before agreeing to have dinner with Amelia, but her curiosity was stronger than her common sense. Are you ready? William asked as he entered the room. He looked tense, though he tried to hide it. Almost, Elizabeth replied, watching his reflection in the mirror. I don't understand why you changed your mind about dinner. Well, Amelia is our closest friend, he shrugged. Our friend, Elizabeth thought. When did she become our friend? The restaurant was located on a terrace overlooking the sea. Amelia was already waiting for them, elegant in a black dress that seemed too evening for a resort town. At last, she exclaimed, rising to meet them. Elizabeth noticed Amelia's eyes linger on William for a moment before she hugged him. I'm sorry to keep you waiting, William said, his voice sounding particularly soft. They sat down at a table. Amelia sat across from William, and Elizabeth couldn't help but notice how their eyes crossed from time to time. So, how are you enjoying your honeymoon? Amelia asked when the wine arrived. It must be very romantic. Yes, Elizabeth replied, although William has to work a lot. Oh, that's like him, Amelia laughed. He's always been a workaholic. How do you know? Elizabeth asked sharply. You only met him 2 years ago at that party. There was an awkward silence for a moment. Amelia quickly sipped her wine. Well, it's obvious. You can get to know a person well in 2 years. William coughed. Shall we order something? Dinner was held in a strange atmosphere. The conversation flared up and then faded away, filled with omissions and hidden meanings. Do you remember, Elizabeth, Amelia suddenly said, how you dreamed of a wedding on the beach? That was William's and my idea, Elizabeth replied. Really? Amelia looked at William. I thought you wanted something simpler. William began, but the phone rang. Is it work again? Elizabeth asked. Elizabeth noticed Amelia watching him go. You know, Amelia said, turning to Elizabeth, sometimes I think you're so lucky. You have everything you could ever want. Yes, I am happy, Elizabeth replied firmly, and I intend to stay that way. Their eyes met, and for a moment the masks fell off. In Amelia's eyes, Elizabeth saw something that made her heart sink. William returned, and the conversation became casual again. But now Elizabeth noticed every look, every gesture. The way Amelia touched William's arm, telling a joke. The way he smiles at her, not the way he usually does. How they both avoided looking at her at the same time. Shall we take a walk along the promenade? Amelia suggested after dinner. No, Elizabeth replied sharply. We'd better go back to the hotel. Yes, of course, William agreed, but his eyes flashed with disappointment. As they said goodbye, Amelia hugged Elizabeth tightly. Thank you for tonight, my friend. You have no idea how much it means to me. And again, that strange tone, those double meanings. They hardly spoke on the way to the hotel. William was absorbed in his thoughts, and Elizabeth... It was a nice evening, William finally said when they got to the room. Really? Elizabeth looked him in the eye. What did you like about it? What do you mean? He tensed. Nothing. She turned away. I was just thinking how good it is to have such close friends. That night, Elizabeth couldn't sleep for a long time. She lay looking at the ceiling and remembered every moment of the dinner, every look, every gesture. All those small details that had seemed insignificant before now formed a terrifying picture. William was sleeping next to me. His phone vibrated again, but this time Elizabeth didn't look at the screen. She already knew who the message was from. She knew that her perfect world was crumbling before her eyes. The night was stifling. Elizabeth tossed and turned in bed, unable to sleep. Dinner with Amelia was on her mind, leaving a bitter aftertaste of suspicion and incompleteness. The clock read 3 a.m. William was sleeping next to her, his breathing steady and calm. How can he sleep so peacefully? Elizabeth thought, recalling all the strange moments of the past few days. Suddenly, the silence was broken by the vibration of the phone. William's smartphone screen lit up on the nightstand. Elizabeth froze. Who could be texting so late? The message appeared right on the lock screen. Amelia, I can't sleep, thinking about you. Today was so hard. Elizabeth felt her heart stop. The message disappeared, but the words seemed to be burned into her mind. Oh, God, she whispered, putting her hand over her mouth to keep from screaming. The phone vibrated again. Amelia, I'm sorry we can't be together right now. Elizabeth got out of bed, trying not to wake her husband. She felt sick to her stomach. She tiptoed to the bathroom and closed the door. With trembling hands, she turned on the water and looked at herself in the mirror. It can't be, she whispered to her reflection, not them. But it all fit together. The nightly messages, William's strange behavior, Amelia's accidental appearance in Portofino, their glances at dinner. Elizabeth sat on the edge of the tub, trying to breathe steadily. Memories flashed through her mind. How Amelia had helped with the wedding, how she had advised her on the dress, how she had calmed her before the ceremony. You deserve the best, my friend, she recalled Amelia's words. Now they sounded like a mockery. Another phone vibration came from the room. Elizabeth shuddered. How long has this been going on? How long had they been? She went back to the bedroom. William was still asleep, but now his face looked strange to her. Where was the man she loved? the one who had pledged his allegiance to her at the altar just 2 weeks ago? The phone lit up again. This time, Elizabeth picked it up. The password. She tried their wedding date. It didn't work. Her birthday, too. And then, she froze. Amelia's birthday. The screen unlocked. Her hands trembled as she opened the messages. Hundreds of messages, photos, meeting plans. I love you. I can't hide it anymore. We'll be together soon. Sorry for keeping you waiting. Some of the messages were dated before the wedding. Oh, God, Elizabeth whispered, sinking to the floor. Elizabeth? William's sleepy voice made her flinch. He sat up abruptly on the bed, seeing the phone in her hands. His face changed. It's not what you think, he said quickly. What do I think, William? She sounded strangely calm. That my best friend and my husband. Listen. He got up from the bed, trying to approach her. I can explain everything. Really? She looked up at him, her eyes full of tears. Before the wedding? During the preparations for it? When were you planning to tell me? Elizabeth, please. Stay away from me. She stepped back to the door. How could you? Both of you. It's complicated. He ran his hand through his hair. We didn't want to hurt you. You didn't want to hurt me? She laughed bitterly. So you decided that betraying me on our honeymoon would be less painful? It didn't just happen. He took a step toward her. We fought against this feeling, but you decided that your love was more important than my feelings? She threw the phone on the bed. For our promises? To our friendship? At that moment, the phone vibrated again. They both looked at the screen. Amelia, I can't wait to see you tomorrow. Elizabeth felt her legs give out. I'm going home, she said quietly. Elizabeth, wait, let's talk. About what? About how you planned your future behind my back? We didn't. He tried to take her hand, but she pulled it away. Don't touch me. Her voice trembled. She ran out of the room without looking back. Tears streamed down her face, but she did not wipe them away. Amelia's words from the wedding were playing in her head. You are made for each other. Now she realized that it was not just a phrase. It was a confession. A confession that she, Elizabeth, was standing in the way of their happiness. The hotel lobby was empty. Elizabeth sat down in a chair, trying to collect her thoughts. Her world had been shattered, and she didn't know how to go on. The phone in her purse vibrated. A message from Amelia. Girlfriend, are you awake? Can we have breakfast together tomorrow? Elizabeth looked at the message and smiled for the first time that evening. Bitterly, but decisively. The game is over, she thought. It's time to find out the truth. The morning sun shone mercilessly through the windows of the hotel restaurant. Elizabeth was sitting at a table, clutching a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. She hadn't slept all night, but her adrenaline was keeping her on her toes. Elizabeth! Amelia's joyful voice came from behind her. I'm so glad you agreed to have breakfast with me. Elizabeth slowly looked up. Amelia looked flawless fresh, smiling in a new dress. She must have bought it especially for him, she thought bitterly. Sit down, Elizabeth said quietly. Something in her tone made Amelia freeze. Her smile faded a little. Of course, my friend. Is something wrong? Don't call me friend. Elizabeth looked her straight in the eye. Amelia froze with her coffee cup in hand. What do you mean? She tried to smile, but it was unconvincing. I saw your messages. Elizabeth took out her phone and put it on the table. Before the wedding and after. Amelia slowly lowered her cup, her hands trembling slightly. Elizabeth interrupted her. How long has this been going on? 2? You don't understand. Amelia looked around nervously. We didn't mean to. Mean to do what? Hurt me? Elizabeth laughed bitterly. To deceive me? Laugh behind my back? We didn't laugh. Amelia's eyes filled with tears. We were fighting this feeling. Fought? Elizabeth raised her voice, and several of the visitors turned to them. How? By making secret meetings? By exchanging love messages? Quiet, please. Amelia looked at her pleadingly. Let's go outside, talk calmly. Why? So you can make up some more lies? Elizabeth felt tears streaming down her cheeks. I trusted you. You were my best friend. I am your friend. Amelia tried to take her hand, but Elizabeth pulled it away. Friend? She shook her head. Friends don't do that. They don't steal each other's husbands. I didn't steal him! Amelia suddenly burst out. The restaurant fell silent. All eyes were on their table. Amelia put her hand over her mouth as if trying to take the words back. Finally, Elizabeth said quietly. Finally, the truth. Yes, you did. Elizabeth stood up. You've always wanted this. All these years. When you introduced us. When you helped me with the wedding. You were just waiting for your moment. That's not true. Amelia stood up too. I really wanted you to be happy, but... But what? You thought you could make him happier? We love each other, Amelia whispered. We really do. Elizabeth felt something inside her finally break. Then why did you have this wedding? Her voice trembled. Why did you have to take vows if you already... He didn't want to hurt you. Amelia looked down. We thought we could overcome this feeling. Elizabeth shook her head. How noble. I insisted on meeting you, Amelia suddenly admitted. I couldn't take it anymore, seeing you together. Oh, it was hard for you. Elizabeth smiled bitterly. And it's easy for me now? At that moment, William entered the restaurant. He froze when he saw them both. Elizabeth, he began. Don't, she held up her hand. I understand. You deserve each other. She started to leave, but turned back at the door. You know what's worse? It's not that you betrayed me, but that you did it with a smile on your face, pretending to be my closest people. Already in the corridor, she heard Amelia crying and William saying something quietly to her. And for the first time in all this time, Elizabeth felt not pain, but relief. Finally, everything had fallen into place. The masks had finally fallen off. She took out her phone and dialed the airport. It was time to go home. Time to start a new life. A life without lies and betrayal. We need to talk. William's voice came from behind Elizabeth as she packed her suitcase. About what? She didn't even turn around. About how long you've been lying to me? Or about how you've been planning your future behind my back? Please, just listen to me. Elizabeth turned around slowly. William stood in the doorway of the hotel room, confused, with dark circles under his eyes. Okay, she sat on the edge of the bed. Talk. I didn't plan for it to happen like this. He ran his hand through his hair. It just... happened. Just happened? Elizabeth smiled bitterly. What exactly did just happen mean? That you fell in love with my best friend? Or the fact that you've been lying to me for months? It's complicated. Oh no, she interrupted him. It's just as simple as that. You're a liar. She's a traitor. And I'm the fool who didn't notice. William took a step toward her. You're not a fool. We just... What? Got carried away? Lost our heads? Her voice trembled with anger. Tell me, William, when did it start? Before the wedding? During the preparations for it? Your silence is more eloquent than any words. She shook her head. You know what's worse? I think back to every moment of our life and wonder if it was real or a lie. Not everything was a lie, he said quietly. I really loved you. You did? She stood up. So much that you cheated with my best friend? I'm confused. He tried to take her hand, but she pulled away. Amelia understood me. Oh, of course! Elizabeth laughed, but her laugh was not joyful. So understanding that she helped me choose my wedding dress, knowing she was sleeping with my fiancé. Don't talk like that. What am I supposed to say? She raised her voice. What do you call what you did? An affair? Love? Or just meanness? Footsteps were heard in the hallway. They both fell silent, waiting for the footsteps to subside. I'm going home, Elizabeth finally said. My plane leaves in 3 hours. Don't do this. He grabbed her shoulders. Let's try to fix this. Fix it? She looked him in the eye. My trust? Our friendship? Our marriage? I can change. For whom? She gently released herself from his arms. For me? Or for her? He remained silent, and that silence was the best answer. "You know," Elizabeth said, turning to her suitcase, "I always thought that betrayal was something sudden, a passion, an impulse. But you planned everything, every meeting, every lie. We didn't want to hurt you." "Really?" She turned around. "Then why did you marry me? Why make vows you weren't going to keep?" "I thought I could forget her." "And instead I invited her to our honeymoon?" Elizabeth shook her head. She closed her suitcase and straightened up. "You know what's funny? I'm actually grateful to both of you." "Grateful?" He looked at her in surprise. "Yes." She took her purse. "You showed me the truth before I wasted even more years of my life on you." "Elizabeth, don't." She raised her hand. "Just tell me one thing. When you stood in front of the altar and swore to love me forever, who were you thinking of?" "That's what I thought," she said quietly. "Goodbye, William. I hope you will be happy together." She started for the door, but stopped at the threshold. "And you know what? I don't wish you harm. I just hope that one day you will realize the price others have paid for your love." With these words, she left the room, leaving behind not only her husband, but also all her illusions about a happy marriage and loyal friendship. There was a long road to healing ahead, but for the first time in recent days, she felt she could breathe freely. Elizabeth was about to leave the hotel when her phone rang. It was Amelia. "We need to talk," she said, her voice strained. "For the last time. You need to know the whole truth." Elizabeth hesitated, but something in her former friend's voice made her agree. 15 minutes later, at the coffee shop on the corner, Amelia was already waiting at a table. "What is it?" Elizabeth asked, sitting down across from her. "Something you need to know." Amelia pushed the folder toward her. Inside were photographs. Dozens of them. William and Amelia together in restaurants, on the beach, in hotels. Some of them were taken before Elizabeth met William. "What does this mean?" Elizabeth whispered, feeling the ground slipping away from under her feet. Amelia smiled slightly. "It means that I knew him long before I met you." "But why did I introduce you?" Amelia took a sip of her coffee, because his parents were pressuring him. They didn't think I was the right match. Too simple, too poor. And you come from a good family, with a prestigious education. Elizabeth felt nausea rising in her throat. "So all of this was planned?" "At first, yes," Amelia shrugged. "You were supposed to be the perfect wife for the public, and I was to stay in the shadows. But William, he started to really feel something for you. And so I decided to remind him who he really belonged to." Amelia's eyes gleamed coldly. "Do you know how hard it was to watch you try on wedding dresses? How do you plan your life together?" "You were my best friend." "That's why everything turned out so perfectly," Amelia smiled. "Who could have suspected a devoted maid of honor? I was there all the time, at the fittings, at the party, at the wedding itself. And all the while he came to me." Amelia leaned back. "After your fights, after your hard days, he always came back to me." Elizabeth felt tears streaming down her cheeks. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I want you to know that this is no accident. It wasn't a mistake. It was a plan. And do you know what?" She leaned closer. "I even made sure that you couldn't get a good divorce settlement." Amelia pulled out another document. "Do you remember that prenup I helped you draw up? I modified some of the clauses before signing it." Elizabeth grabbed the document with trembling hands. You forged the documents?" "Let's just say," Amelia smiled, "I took care of William and I's future, and you were just a useful piece in the game." "Why now? Why are you telling me all this now?" Elizabeth felt anger rising inside her. "Because I want you to know that you never stood a chance." Amelia stood up. "He was always mine. And you were just a pretty decoration." She put another photo on the table, a recent one taken in Portofino. "By the way, this is from last night. When you were crying in the hotel lobby?" Elizabeth did not look at the photo. She slowly stood up. "You know, Amelia, I have only one regret." "And what is it?" "That I spent so many years thinking of you as a friend." She straightened up. "But you know what? You really deserve each other. Two liars who build happiness on someone else's grief. She turned to leave, but stopped. And one more thing. These documents. I'm sure my lawyer will be very interested to see them, especially in the context of forging official papers. Amelia turned pale. You wouldn't dare. Elizabeth smiled for the first time in a long time. I will, because unlike you, I don't need to pretend anymore. With that, she took all the documents and left the coffee shop, leaving Amelia with a look of shock on her face. For the first time in all those days, Elizabeth felt strong. Now she knew the whole truth, and this knowledge gave her the strength to move on. The plane landed at the airport late at night. Elizabeth left the terminal with only one suitcase. Everything else was left in her hotel room in Italy. But she was carrying something much more valuable with her: documents and photographs that Amelia had recklessly handed over to her. The first thing Elizabeth did when she arrived home was to call her old friend Michael, one of the best lawyers in the city. I need your help, she said, when they met at his office the next morning. Michael carefully studied the documents she brought in. This is serious, Elizabeth, he finally said. Forgery, fraud. Your friend could do real time for this. She's not my friend, Elizabeth replied firmly, and I want them both to pay for everything. What exactly do you want to do? Everything, according to the law, but to the fullest extent possible. The next few days turned into a whirlwind of events. Elizabeth acted quickly and decisively. The first step was to freeze all the joint accounts. She managed to do it before William returned from Italy. He's in shock, a mutual friend told her. He can't even withdraw $1,000. Let him get used to it, Elizabeth replied calmly. The next step was to formally accuse Amelia of forgery. When the police came to her apartment with a warrant, she tried to contact Elizabeth. Please, let's talk. I'll explain everything, she wrote. Elizabeth did not respond. Instead, she handed over to the police all the photos and messages that showed the length of their deception. William tried to meet with her in person. Why are you doing this? He asked, when she finally agreed to a brief meeting in the presence of a lawyer. You're not like that. Not like that? Elizabeth interrupted him. What am I like, William? The naive fool you thought I was? I'm sorry, but that version of me died in Italy. She filed for divorce, giving all the details of their affair. The case quickly gained publicity. Of course, a famous socialite couple, a scandal with forgery. You will destroy my reputation, Amelia shouted during another attempt to meet. And you destroyed my life, Elizabeth calmly replied. I'm destroying your reputation with the truth. You destroyed my life with a lie. William's parents were shocked to hear the whole story. We didn't know, his mother said on the phone to Elizabeth. If we had known. Now you do, she replied, and so does the whole world. The biggest blow to William was the loss of several important clients from his architectural firm. No one wanted to deal with a man whose name was involved in a forgery scandal. Are you satisfied? He asked during the divorce hearing. You've ruined everything. No, Elizabeth replied. You ruined everything. I just showed everyone the truth. Amelia tried to save the day by writing an emotional post on social media about complicated feelings and difficult decisions. But Elizabeth simply posted photos of her and William together before the wedding. You know what's worse? She told Michael. They don't even realize what they did wrong now. They still see themselves as victims. And you? He asked. Do you see yourself as a victim? Elizabeth looked out the window of his office. No, I am not a victim anymore. I am the one who restores justice. With all the paperwork filed, all the charges filed, and the first court date set, Elizabeth finally allowed herself to breathe. She sat in her new apartment, looking out over the city below. Her phone vibrated. A message from William. Will you never forgive us? She looked at the screen for a long time before answering. It's not about forgiveness. It's about justice, and it has its price. Then she blocked his number, walked to the window, and smiled sincerely for the first time in a long time. A new life was ahead of her, without lies, without betrayal, but with a clear understanding of who she was and what she was worth. 6 months passed. The autumn wind was blowing fallen leaves through the streets of the city. Elizabeth sat in the courtroom, calmly watching Amelia receive a suspended sentence for forgery. William was sitting next to her, gaunt, with gray hair on his temples. "The defendant is found guilty." The judge's voice sounded clear and confident. Elizabeth looked at her former friend and felt nothing but a little sadness. Amelia seemed small and frightened, not at all like the confident woman from the Italian coffee shop. After the hearing, William tried to approach her. "Elizabeth, can we talk?" "Why?" She looked at him calmly. "It's all been said." "I've lost everything." His voice trembled. "Clients, reputation." "And I've lost faith in people," she replied. She left the courtroom with her head held high. Her new office was waiting. After the scandal, she'd opened her own publishing house, using the money from the sale of their shared house. "Miss Clark," her new assistant Sophia met her with papers. "We have 3 new manuscripts to review. And the New York Times called to interview you." "About what?" Elizabeth was surprised. "You've become a symbol for many, you know." Elizabeth smiled. Who would have thought that her personal drama would inspire others? In the evening, she met Michael at their favorite restaurant. "How does it feel?" he asked. "After the verdict?" "It's strange." She stirred her coffee thoughtfully. "You know, I thought revenge would be satisfying. But in fact, the best feeling is freedom." Freedom from what? From illusions. From having to pretend. From a toxic relationship. Michael looked at her warmly. "You've changed a lot in these months." "For the better?" "Definitely," he smiled. "You've become stronger." Later that evening, Elizabeth received a letter from William's mother. "Dear Elizabeth, I know I have no right to write to you now, but I want you to know that your father and I have always considered you a true daughter, and the way you have handled all this, we are proud of you." Elizabeth stared at the phone screen for a long time before replying. "Thank you. Sometimes the hardest blows make us better." The next day, she was holding an important meeting at the publishing house when she saw the headline on the news. "Amelia Brown leaves town after scandal." The photo showed her former friend with her suitcases outside a taxi. "Is everything okay?" Sophia asked, catching her eye. In the evening, she sat on the balcony of her new apartment, looking out over the city. On the table was a manuscript, her own book, which she had started writing after returning from Italy. A story of betrayal, forgiveness, and rebirth. Her phone vibrated as she received a message from an unknown number. "I still love you. V." Elizabeth looked at the message, and for the first time in a long time, she laughed out loud. Once upon a time, these words would have broken her heart, but not anymore. She deleted the message and returned to the manuscript. On the first page was an epigraph. "Sometimes you have to lose everything to find yourself." "To a new life," she whispered, raising her wine glass. In the reflection of the window, she saw another Elizabeth, strong, confident, free. A woman who had gone through betrayal and pain, but had not broken, but had become stronger. Her new beginning was not easy, but it was real. And that was the most important thing. Epilogue. A year later, her book became a bestseller. At the presentation, journalists asked, "What would you say to women who have experienced betrayal?" Elizabeth looked into the audience. Betrayal is not the end. It is an opportunity to start a new story, your own story. That evening, when she returned home, she took out an old wedding photo. 3 smiling faces looked at her from the glossy paper. "Thank you," she whispered, tearing the photo up. "You taught me the most important thing, to value myself." She threw the pieces in the trash and walked to the window. The city below was shining with lights, promising new opportunities, new adventures, a new life. And for the first time in a long time, Elizabeth was absolutely sure that the best was yet to come.